It began with a storm, not the kind that lashes against rooftops, but the kind that brews inside the chest. Javier stood at the edge of the small village of Mezquital, his weathered suitcase trembling in his calloused hand. The sky above was an aching grey, low-hanging and swollen with unspoken words. Behind him, the scent of cornfields and wood smoke clung to the air like an old memory. His wife, Alma, didn't cry. Her eyes simply held a vacant look, the kind that settles in when the body is present, but the soul refuses to say goodbye. They were leaving, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The crops had died 2 seasons in a row. The well had dried up. Rumors of sickness, something that lingered in the soil, had sent neighboring families fleeing under the cover of night. It wasn't just survival, it was escape. But what they didn't know was that they weren't just running from something. Something had already chosen to follow. The bus they boarded wheezed like a dying animal, its windows too dirty to see through clearly. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with quiet dread. A few passengers murmured prayers under their breath, clutching charms and family photos. The driver didn't speak, not once. He wore sunglasses despite the overcast day, and his hands never once left the steering wheel. Javier kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. There was something odd in the way the man never blinked. That night, they stopped at a roadside shelter. It was meant for migrants, just a crumbling stone building with a tin roof, but it reeked of rot and rusted blood. Alma refused to sleep inside. She claimed she heard whispers through the cracked walls. "They know we're not from here," she said, trembling. Javier thought it was exhaustion, maybe fear, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness here was not just night, it was watching. 3 weeks later, they arrived at the outskirts of a town in southern Texas. A man who went by Don Ramon offered them shelter in what he called the House of Welcome. The building stood alone on a barren field, its paint peeled and windows boarded as if it were trying to hold something in. But they had no choice. Hunger doesn't wait for pride. Inside, the walls were yellowed, warped with age and moisture. There was a strange humming noise that came from the attic at night. Alma refused to go upstairs. Javier went once, only once, and returned pale, drenched in sweat. He claimed it was just rodents, but that night, he couldn't sleep. Something scraped across the floorboards above their heads, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps. They asked Ramon about it. He smiled too wide and said, "Old houses remember their owners. Sometimes they wait for them." One morning, Alma was gone. No sign of struggle, no trace. Just her rosary left dangling from the doorknob. Javier tore the house apart. He screamed her name into the fields until his voice cracked. Ramon simply said, "Maybe she went back." "Back where?" Javier hissed, eyes bloodshot. Ramon shrugged. "Where the soul feels safe." That night, Javier wandered into the attic. There were no rodents, no cobwebs, just a mirror. Tall, ornate, and clean as if it had been polished recently. In its reflection, the attic was empty. But when he looked around, he saw Alma. She stood behind him, her face calm, her eyes glassy. When he turned, she was gone. The townspeople always avoided the House of Welcome. A shopkeeper warned Javier, whispering, "That house don't belong to us. It never did. It's older than this town. People who stay too long, they disappear." Javier tried to leave, packed his bag, walked down the long dirt path, but the road curved back. No matter how far he walked, he ended up in front of the same house. He cried, he screamed, he prayed. The wind carried his voice, but the soil never changed. Only the mirror in the attic remained honest. It showed the house decaying faster with every passing day. He finally understood. They hadn't crossed a border. They had crossed a threshold. Something in Mezquital had attached itself to their grief, followed them like a shadow that stretches across years. It fed on loss, on displacement, on the silence between heartbeats. Javier stopped trying to leave. He sat by the mirror each night, hoping to see Alma. Sometimes he did. She would whisper things, but her lips never moved. Her reflection aged backwards, while Javier's hair turned white in weeks. Then, one night, he saw his village in the mirror. Not how it was when they left, but how it looked before everything went wrong. Children running, fields alive, Alma cooking, smiling. He reached out. His hand touched glass, cold, slick, but he swore he felt soil under his fingers, and the scent, wood smoke and corn. The next morning, the house was empty. No Javier, no suitcase, only the mirror, shattered, and the attic, humming quietly. They called it El Silencio, a dusty, half-forgotten stretch of land straddling the Mexico-US border. No wall, no fences, just an open wound in the desert hidden from satellites by a strange magnetic interference. For decades, smugglers had avoided it, not out of fear of patrols, but because things went missing there. People mostly, vehicles. Once, even an entire convoy of migrants vanished without a trace. The locals whispered about it, said the land was cursed. But in 1987, no one told Vicente. Vicente Castañeda was 43, a mechanic from Veracruz. After years of grinding poverty, he'd made up his mind. He would cross into the US with his cousin Ernesto, his teenage daughter Lucia, and a group of 12 others. He'd paid everything he had to a coyote named Adan, who swore he knew a shortcut that avoided border patrol entirely, a way through El Silencio. They began at dusk. The desert looked like a sea of dying embers, shadows dancing as the sun bled into the horizon. Vicente was sweating through his shirt, holding Lucia's hand tightly. Ernesto walked beside them, clutching a plastic jug of water. The coyote, Adan, led them fast, barely speaking. He moved like a man familiar with ghosts. As night deepened, the terrain grew strange. Cacti bent in unnatural angles. Rocks shimmered with an odd sheen. Someone whispered that they were being watched. Vicente brushed it off, probably nerves. But when they passed a dry riverbed, and he noticed the same twisted tree they'd seen an hour ago, a chill passed through his spine. They were walking in circles. The group stopped to rest. A woman named Mariella, in her late 50s, began sobbing uncontrollably. "I heard my mother," she said, her voice trembling. "She's been dead for 10 years. No one laughed. Even Adan looked shaken. He ordered everyone to stay silent, but then a baby's cry echoed across the sand. There were no babies in their group. Panic spread like fire. Vicente held Lucia tighter as shadows began to stretch and warp unnaturally. One man, Raul, bolted into the darkness. His scream came less than 30 seconds later, high-pitched, wet, then suddenly cut short. Ernesto wanted to go after him. Vicente stopped him. "He's gone," he said, his voice hollow. By midnight, Adan admitted they were lost. His compass spun erratically. GPS devices died one by one. Even the stars above them seemed to have shifted. Lucia began murmuring about someone following her, a little girl with no eyes, always at the edge of her vision. Vicente didn't want to believe it, but when he saw 2 barefoot prints beside her sleeping mat, prints smaller than a child's, his blood ran cold. Then came the humming. Deep, guttural, and constant, like the sound of an engine beneath the earth. They found an old road, mostly buried in sand. Adan insisted they follow it. "This was never here," he mumbled. No one argued. They walked. Some wept. Others prayed. Vicente just kept looking over his shoulder, afraid to see what was there, and even more afraid to find nothing. By dawn, they found the bus. It stood half sunken in the sand, rusted and ancient, though its make was no older than the 1970s. The door creaked open, and inside were seats and people, or what used to be people. Dried out corpses, faces stretched in eternal screams. One had a crucifix clutched so tightly in her hand, the metal had pierced bone. Ernesto gagged and stumbled out. Lucia froze. "I know her," she whispered, pointing to a girl near the back. She's me." Vicente pulled her away. No one argued when they torched the bus. It burned quickly, with a foul black smoke. Adan said nothing. His eyes were unfocused, his lips moving silently. He was praying, or losing his mind. They walked for 2 more days. 7 people remained. The rest had either vanished or collapsed from exhaustion and fear. Vicente had started seeing figures at the edge of the group. A man dragging a shovel. A woman with bleeding eyes. They never got closer. They never left. Just watched. The road became gravel, then pavement. Finally, a sign. "Welcome to Arizona." But the border crossing was empty. Abandoned. Dusty cars with keys still in the ignition. Half-eaten meals. A radio played softly in an office. Some old ballad. But no people. Vicente called out. Nothing. Eventually they reached Tucson. But something was wrong. The people didn't see them. Not really. A waiter at a diner looked through Vicente like he wasn't there. They could eat, drink, sleep. But no one ever responded to them. It was like they didn't exist. Lucia cried herself to sleep every night. Ernesto tried to call his sister in Los Angeles. The number didn't work. A week passed, then 2. Then Vicente saw the news. A bus had been found buried in the Sonoran desert, full of skeletons. Experts said it had been missing since 1979. He showed the article to Lucia. She just stared at him, eyes hollow. "Dad," she whispered, "what if we never made it?" It's been 30 years. Vicente still walks the streets of Tucson. People pass him by like wind. Lucia stopped aging. Ernesto just disappeared one morning. Vicente doesn't sleep. He hears voices in the walls sometimes. Raul's laugh or Mariella's sobs. And sometimes the cry of a baby. He no longer questions it. Some nights, he returns to the edge of El Silencio, just to stare, just to remember, just in case someone else tries to cross. Elijah had never intended to flee his home, but war doesn't wait for intention. When the government collapsed in his coastal African country, he gathered what he could. A worn satchel, his sister Yara's hand, and a hope too fragile to name. Rumours spoke of a train that departed from the crumbling city of Gander at midnight, one that carried migrants northward, past borders and checkpoints, into a place called Veralia, a place not marked on any map. The station was silent when they arrived, a crescent moon hanging low in the sky. The platform was cracked, swallowed by weeds, and the schedule board had no times. Elijah nearly turned back, but the distant sound of a whistle stopped him. A silver train emerged from the mist, sleek, unmarked, and too quiet. A conductor in a grey uniform waited, motionless, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his cap. Without a word, he gestured them aboard. Inside, the train was cold, not from temperature, but something deeper, like a chill in the soul. Each carriage was lit by flickering sconces, casting long shadows. Few passengers sat, all of them silent, clutching personal items like totems, a faded photograph, a broken toy, a single shoe. Elijah and Yara chose seats near the middle. A woman across from them stared out the window, her breath fogging the glass, though it was not cold. Hours passed. The scenery never changed. Grey fields, black trees, no stars. Elijah leaned closer to Yara, whispering that he wasn't sure they were moving at all. She looked at him with wide eyes. There's no sound, no tracks, no engine. That's when the lights went out for a full minute. When they recessioned, some passengers were gone. The woman across from them had vanished. Her seat was still warm. Elijah ventured toward the next carriage, heart pounding. The door creaked open into darkness. No lamps here, only faint glows. Eyes maybe, whispers curled around him, too soft to understand, too urgent to ignore. The floor beneath his feet felt soft. Breathing, he called out, but his voice was swallowed. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his wrist. "Yara, don't leave me alone," she whispered. Behind her, the seats of the previous carriage were now empty. Every last one. No one had moved. No one had passed. Yet every seat was vacant. Panic rose in Elijah's throat. He turned to look out the window. There was no outside, only black. Then came the announcement, "Prepare for crossing." The voice was mechanical, but it echoed with something deeper, like it had been spoken many times, by many mouths. The windows shimmered. Elijah saw not a border, but a veil, a silken curtain floating in the sky, stretching endlessly. The train passed through it. The world outside changed. Cities twisted like melting wax. Rivers flowed backward. The moon turned red, then split into three. Elijah clutched Yara, but she had gone stiff. Her eyes rolled back, lips murmuring words he couldn't understand. Her voice was not hers. Elijah begged the conductor for answers. The man tilted his head, finally speaking. "Every journey demands a payment. Some pay with gold, others with memory, and some with blood." Elijah demanded they turn back, but the conductor only smiled. There is no back, only forward. Doors opened again. This time, Elijah was the only one sitting. The train was empty, not just of passengers, of furniture, of lights, of time. Even Yara had vanished, her presence replaced by silence. The conductor placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You brought her. That was the fare." The train stopped at a station that didn't exist. Crumbling archways loomed above. Stone platforms cracked open to reveal black liquid pulsing beneath. Elijah stepped off, knees weak, the air around him humming like it remembered sorrow. Above him, a sign flickered. Veralia. All who enter are forgotten. He wandered through the city, if it could be called that. Buildings curved in impossible angles. People moved, but their faces were wrong, like someone remembered them incorrectly. He searched for Yara, calling her name into alleys that swallowed sound. No one responded. Eventually, he reached a square where a massive obsidian mirror stood, etched in gold across the top. "Seek who you lost." Elijah stepped closer, and the surface shimmered. Yara appeared, not as he remembered, but older, her eyes vacant. She stood among twisted trees in a place Elijah had never seen. Her lips moved, repeating the same word. "Run." He touched the mirror. Pain shot through his arm. His reflection disappeared, replaced by another version of him. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, kneeling in a place of ash. That version looked at him, smiled faintly, and whispered, "You already stayed too long." Veralia had no day, only night. The clock tower in the center ticked backward, its hands moving in jagged stutters. Elijah forgot his name, then his language. He walked for what felt like years. Once he thought he saw Yara again, or someone wearing her face, beckoning him from a doorway, only to vanish into darkness. The people of Veralia, if they were people, fed on memory. They traded voices for warmth, laughter for a place to sleep. Elijah refused, but hunger came, so did cold, and eventually silence. On his last night, Elijah returned to the station. The silver train waited, door open, no conductor, no light, just a seat in the middle carriage with his name carved into the cushion. He stepped inside. As the door shut behind him, he looked back one last time and saw hundreds standing on the platform, all versions of himself, all watching. Some wept, some smiled, some turned away. The train began to move, but this time there was no track, only void.